Hello everyone, it's great to be with you again this morning. It's an honour and a privilege to be able to join you. Thank you. Last month I introduced you to Sarah and to Bethany, and we told you one of my favourite stories in the whole Bible. When Mary went to visit her cousin Elizabeth, and when Mary shouted hello,
hello,
the baby in Elizabeth's tummy jumped. It's a brilliant story and a very, very short story. But this morning, I want to tell you an even shorter story. But before I do that, I'm going to set the scene by going over to the other side of the town. So, I don't know which part of the Bible you like reading the most. The Bible is amazing. I love it. I need it. But it's so varied. It's all true. It's all God-inspired. And yet it's so varied. The history, the stories, the poetry, the Psalms, the prophecy. But something that can be quite hard going for a lot of us in the Bible is the genealogies, the family trees that appear in Genesis and Numbers and Chronicles. These lists of people, these family trees, where it's just name after name after name after name after name. And I've brought you to a graveyard today. It's an old graveyard. It's not been used for new burials or funerals for many, many, many years. The gravestone I'm standing beside says 1724 on it. And sometimes I'll wander around and just look at the stones, read name after name after name after name, and there's not much more information than that. It's a name. It was a real person who lived a real life, but I don't really know anything else about them other than their name. But sometimes I'll come across a gravestone that doesn't just have a name. It's got a bit of text. It's got some information on an achievement or what they did as a job, and it gives you a little glimpse into an individual's life many years ago. And we're going to look at Genesis 36 this morning. Now, Genesis 36 is Esau's family tree. Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. And Jacob went on to become Israel. And we know lots about him, but we don't know as much about Esau. But Esau's family tree is in Genesis 36. And like this graveyard, there are lots of names after names after names. But also, just like this graveyard, one of the names has a little bit of information after it that gives you a glimpse into someone's life. And we're going to look at that person this morning. So let's look at Genesis 36, the family tree of Esau. It's quite a long chapter, and it starts off in verse 1. This is the account of the family line of Esau, that is Edom. And Esau had a son called Eliphaz, and then the names in the family tree begin. There was Eliphaz, there was Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, Kenaz, Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, Mizah, name after name. And then later on in the chapter, there's a man called Zibeon. His name appears. And it says in verse 24, the sons of Zibeon, Aiah and Anah. And then there's a little bit of text about Anah. It says, this is the Anah who discovered the hot springs in the desert while he was grazing the donkeys of his father Zibeon. That's what we know about Anah, but we know a little bit about him, and that's what he did. One day he was out grazing his dad's donkeys, and he discovered hot springs. He discovered hot springs whilst grazing his dad's donkeys. And I'd like us to think about that story this morning. I don't have much experience of hot springs, but a few years ago I was out in the Middle East with Rachel, my wife, and we were visiting friends who were working out there. And one evening they took us out of the city into the hills, and there was a hot spring. I saw what a hot spring looked like, and it was a stream. It was a proper stream that came out of the hills. You could get in this and have a bath if you wanted to. It was deep enough, it was big enough to do that. It wasn't a little drip. It was a stream, it was a hot spring that came out of the hills. And I didn't know we were going to this hot spring, so I didn't get in because I didn't have a towel or anything. But I just sat on the bank with my feet in the water, and it was hot. It was proper hot water that you could have a bath in if you wanted to. It was incredible. It was an incredible thing. And Aina discovered a hot spring. One day he discovered this continuous flow of hot water. It wasn't just going to be hot water for a couple of hours, hot water for a day. Aina somehow discovered this continuous flow of hot water, a hot spring. And this was in the days before central heating, before power showers, before combi boilers. Aina discovered hot water. It was an incredible discovery, and it was a discovery that would change his life. It must have been. Aina's life must have been different from this point onwards after discovering these hot springs in the desert. But let's have a think about what Aina was doing when he made that discovery. He was grazing the donkeys of his father, Zibeon. He was walking around with his dad's donkeys looking for grass, shrubs, bushes, stuff that the donkeys could eat. That's what he was doing, walking around grazing his dad's donkeys. Now, I don't know how Aina felt about grazing his dad's donkeys. The Bible doesn't say. But I would imagine it wasn't his dream job. It wasn't camels. They had a bit of value, a bit of prestige. It was donkeys. And they weren't even his donkeys. They were his dad's donkeys. There wouldn't have been a lot of entertainment on hand. It maybe got a bit boring at times. But at the same time, there were wild animals. There were thieves in those days that would have wanted to take people's flocks, herds, animals. So it's a strange mix, I'd imagine, of Aina being in a season in his life where he's doing something that he doesn't want to be doing for a long period of time. He's got other plans. He's got other things he wants to be doing with his life. But he's in this season where things can seem a bit boring and monotonous at times. Yet at the same time, there's a bit of anxiety and there's a little bit of fear. That's what I'd imagine Aina experienced when he was grazing his dad's donkeys. And I wonder if that context, that setting, that season is something that we can completely relate to at this moment in time. Because even though Aina lived thousands of years ago in a different part of the world, in very different circumstances, I wonder actually if his experience and what he felt and what he thought at times wasn't actually that dissimilar to how a lot of us are feeling at the moment. We're in this season in our life where we don't want it to be like this forever. I've got plans for the future, and It seems as if they're on hold at the moment, and I just want to get on with the rest of my life. I've got dreams I want to see fulfilled, and yet I'm stuck in this place, not really able to move forward, it would seem. And I think a lot of us have felt bored over the past few months at times. We've not been able to do what we really wanted to be doing. And at the same time, in the background, there's some anxiety and there's some fear. And actually, we've been experiencing a lot of the emotions that I'd imagine Anna experienced. They seem completely different. Grazing dad's donkeys in the Middle East thousands of years ago and being stuck at home for most of the day in Scotland in 2020. But maybe they're not that dissimilar when you drill down a little bit. But that was the context in which Anna made a discovery that would change his life forever. During that season that Anna was in, of grazing his dad's donkeys, that's when he found something. That's when he discovered something that would mean that his life would not be the same. It was going to be different. So that's my desire for us this morning, that during this season that we are in at the moment, that we would discover something about God that would change us forever, that we would make a discovery that would transform us. It would transform the way we see things, it would transform the way we think about things, it would transform our relationship with God, that we would make a discovery in this season that would mean that our lives are never the same again going forward. And we're all individuals, and we're all different, and we've got different experiences, and God knows what we need to discover about him. And what I need to discover about him is probably different from what you need to discover about him. And what you need to discover about him might be different from what other people need to discover about him. And that's fine. God knows. He knows. Some of us maybe need to discover God's love in a way that we've never known before. Some of us maybe need to discover God's grace in a way that we've never known before, or discover God's mercy, or discover God's peace, or discover God's patience, or his faithfulness. Some of us maybe need to discover God's kindness, or discover his goodness, or discover his joy in a way that we've never known before. God knows what we need to discover about him. Some of us maybe need to discover for the first time how God really views us as people with incredible value and as people who are worth dying for. Some of us maybe need to discover that God has a plan for our lives. That God's plans are not for some people or for other people, but they are for each of us. That God has an individualized, special plan for every one of us, for each of us. God knows. He knows what I need to discover about him, and he knows what you need to discover about him in order for our lives to be different. So I would encourage you to pray that today, to ask God to help you discover the thing that you need to discover about him in order to be transformed. And just as Anna discovered hot springs that would change his life during that season of grazing donkeys, wouldn't it be brilliant if we can look back at this season and say, that was the season during which I discovered something amazing about God that changed my life. God loves us and He's committed to us, and He wants us to discover new things about Him, because He knows that when we do, we'll be different and our lives will be changed. It's a brilliant story. Genesis 36 verse 24. Anah discovered hot springs in the desert when he was grazing the donkeys of his father Zibeon. God bless and have a great week.